Today I want to talk about the idea that men and women are interchangeable, that men can do everything women can do and vice versa, and that there's little to no difference between men and women and their abilities, apart from those that have been foisted upon us by societal constructs. To start off, we have to take a look at the political and cultural attack against the concept of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman.
The political and cultural attack against the very concept of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman? That sounds pretty serious. Someone should get on that. Though before we do, I just need to give a content warning for the following: Nazi fascism, anti-Semitism, colonialism, racism, xenophobia, transphobia, transerasure, and misgendering. Hey there, it's Ethel here, and today we're responding to a video titled How Feminism Led to the Trans Movement by far-right vlogger Brittany Sellner, also known as Brittany Pettibone. As some of you have likely sussed out already, the attack mentioned earlier is nothing short of classic far-right hyperbole, painting the fact that science has expanded our understanding of sex over the past century as an attack on Western civilization. Now, where does this supposed attack come from? Well, Brittany Sellner has some ideas she supports with, and I shit you not, a TikTok video.
But language aside, something else that I think is worth considering is where this push to redefine gender first originated. And I recently stumbled across a very interesting video which I think answers this question quite well.
And before I get some TERFs up in my comment sections being like, women means adult human female. First of all, fuck you. Second of all, y'all don't even know your feminist history. Second wave feminism was about relieving women from their reproductive roles and duties. It's regressive to reclaim female as this like fucking end-all be-all term for what womanhood is. Like, literally know your history. Feminism was not about that. Feminism was about alleviating these gender roles and gender duties based on reproductive capability. It was about getting rid of it. And that's why feminism belongs to us queers and trans people now, because it begat us, so fuck off.
Personally, I fully agree with this video. Whether feminists realize it or not, in fighting to redefine traditional gender roles, they were the ones who took the very first step towards a society in which no significant borders between men and women are acknowledged, and men and women are considered to be basically the same to the point that they are interchangeable. While feminism might have claimed to simply be fighting for equal rights between men and women, the various waves of feminism went far beyond that, with many women choosing to fully usurp the male role, claiming that women are capable of absolutely everything that men are, and that aside from women needing men's sperm to procreate, the world would be exactly the same if men didn't exist. And so now, naturally, many men are doing the exact same thing and are choosing to usurp the female role. Pandora's box has been opened, so to speak, and at the end of this road, we're going to find ourselves in a society in which there are zero borders between men and women. Men and women will be considered exactly the same.
So let's get one thing absolutely clear. When Brittany Sellner says feminism led to the trans movement, she doesn't mean the collective of human rights activists fighting for trans equality. She is referring to the very existence of trans people, specifically trans women usurping the female role, and vice versa. She actually believes feminism created trans people. As for the video she uses to support her claims, I don't know who this person is or their views in general, and I can't find out as I live in India, where TikTok is currently banned. In regards to what they say, however, they're ambiguous as to whether they mean begat us in the sense of the human rights movement just mentioned, queer being inherently anti-assimilationist and thus a political term, or us as in trans people in general, like Brittany Sellner believes. If it's the latter, they're simply wrong. Oh well, it's a TikTok video. If it's the former, again, they're a TikTok artist, meaning that the amount of nuance anyone can give is limited due to the chosen medium. You can only say so much in 60 seconds. Fact is, nobody should be taking a TikTok video and presenting them as justification for their unfounded beliefs. Certainly not a self-labeled political activist. I mean, how the hell Brittany has 150,000 subscribers is beyond me. Speaking of unfounded beliefs, Brittany's timescale when it comes to trans people being culturally significant so not even existing but having a marked cultural impact, is off by a factor of about 12,000 years. At least. What I mean is, gender nonconformity, including the existence of trans people, was so culturally significant throughout so many early civilizations, being wrapped up in religious practices, that these practices are thought to have a shared origin dating back to the Upper Paleolithic. Now, the Upper Paleolithic, also known as the Late Stone Age, was a period that spanned between 50,000 to 12,000 years before present day. And that's the lower limit. Due to how difficult it is to study cultures that far back, Professor David F. Greenberg acknowledges the possibility that the practice of the gender nonconforming shaman may date back even further. So considering that fact, one has to wonder, when did second wave feminism invent the time machine, go back in time 12,000 plus years, introduce humankind to feminist philosophy, only for said philosophy to vanish completely before we've reached recorded history, save the trans bit that somehow survived without the rest? Because those are the sort of steps needed to uphold the conspiracy that feminism is responsible for the existence of trans people. Sadly, not many people know the depth of trans history due to the cultural erasure carried out by Christianity, starting in Europe in the 4th century Common Era, with the passing of numerous laws during the Christianization of Rome. Laws that would be preserved in the Theodosian Code, commissioned by Theodosius II and Valentinian III. Said codes outlawed not just marriage and sex between men, but of perceived men taking on any role typically associated with women, destroying millennia of Western cultural heritage in the process. The infection of cisnormativity then spread overseas with the advent of colonialism. When the Spanish arrived in the New World, only to discover trans priestesses in numerous South American cultures, they implemented laws that order such people to be executed by means of sword, public burning, or having them torn apart by dogs. Similarly, in India, the British Raj came to discover the existence of the Hijra community, a group encompassing intersex, trans, and other queer identities. The Hijra community was quickly designated a criminal caste in the northwestern part of the country, before said designation spread to the country as a whole with the passing of the 27th Criminal Tribes Act. This made it so every member of the Hijra community was legally required to register their existence with the British state, resulting in increased surveillance and colonial brutality. Meanwhile, in North America, the colonizers there came to find out about the existence of distinct identities among various local cultures, including the Cree, the Lakota, and the Zuni, identities we now refer to under the umbrella of Two-Spirit. Now, some of these identities are broadly trans, others aren't, yet all of them have deep religious and cultural significance, so the colonizers felt the desperate need to put an end to things. And part of the way they achieved this was with the creation of Christian boarding schools, where native children, taken from their families by force, were indoctrinated into the European Christian mindset. Sadly, the practice resulted in cross-generational trauma and a general distrust for the spiritually profound two-spirits, as well as mundane trans people. So to be clear, cisnormativity, as seen today, only exists thanks to millennia of Christian-led colonial violence. It is not the default, it is not normal, it is indoctrination that was forced upon the people of the world at the tip of a sword. And the moment Christianity lost the ability to do that, the entire system and the lie it was founded upon started to crumble almost immediately. But putting aside the cultural impact of trans people for a second, even if we focus only on the modern science surrounding us, Brittany is still off by about 4 decades. While second wave feminism began in the early 1960s, the scientific exploration of trans people can largely be thought to date back to the foundation of the Institute für Sexualwissenschaft by Magnus Hirschfeld in 1919 Germany. Because whilst trans people had been discussed by the scientific community, they were usually seen as these rare occurrences that specific people took an interest in. At the time, there wasn't even a word for trans people in Western science. That all changed with Hirschfeld's Institute for Sex Research. It was Hirschfeld who gave us the word transvestite, combining trans, across, and vestir, clothe. And whilst the focus of the name was on clothing, these people were offered early forms of medical confirmation at the Institute. The point is, a distinction hadn't yet been made between being a transgender person and being a cis cross-dresser. That would develop over time, leading transvestite to be replaced with transsexual and transsexual with transgender. But it was the groundwork laid down by Hirschfeld that would allow for said advancements as scientific understanding grew. Sadly, it wasn't without setbacks. As the Nazis rose to power, they raided the Institute, incarcerated many of its service users and members of staff, and destroyed their research. You know those photos of book burnings, the photos conservatives love to call back to when they pretend like not being paid to say shit is the same as censorship? The majority of those books came from the Institute for Sex Research. The Nazis quite literally tried to erase trans people from existence. Something Brittany would have done well to learn about and to keep in mind when considering arguments like these.
It's also resulted in a push to erase all gendered language. For example, midwives in Brighton have been told they can replace the word breastfeeding with chest feeding and mother with mother or birthing parent as part of efforts to be more gender inclusive. They've also been told that breast milk should be replaced by phrases such as human milk, breast, chest milk, and milk from the feeding mother or parent. Furthermore, NHS doctors were instructed not to use the word mother and to instead use the term pregnant people so as not to offend transgender people. Granted, both of these articles came out of the UK, but we are seeing similar things happen in the United States. For example, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Rules Committee Chairman James P. McGovern recently introduced gender-neutral language in new rules for Congress. Obviously, these Congress rules aren't bound by law, but there have been instances of people in the UK being investigated and even arrested for misgendering transgender people. And the question is, how long before similar measures come to the United States and other Western countries?
Except that's not true. Caroline Farrow, the woman investigated by the UK police, was not cautioned because she misgendered someone. She was cautioned for leading a harassment campaign against human rights activist Susie Green and her trans daughter, Jackie. Part of which was Farrow declaring Green a child abuser without evidence, as a means of inciting abuse against her. Farrow also wasn't arrested. Instead, she was asked to come down to the station to conduct a voluntary taped interview to have her side on record. And all of this is explained in the BBC article Brittany showed on screen. That's why misgendering was put in quotation marks in the headline, to denote a dubious claim on Farrow's part. As for the second headline Brittany showed, the one that does claim Farrow was arrested, that's from the Daily Fail, a fascist rag from the UK that is so unreliable that it's not accepted as a source on websites like Wikipedia. And it's a similar case with the story of nurses being banned from using the word mother. Again, this headline comes from the Daily Fail, so rather naturally, it's a bunch of bollocks. Medical staff weren't banned from using the word mother, they were simply asked to use alternatives where suitable. The guide, titled A Guide to Effective Communication, Inclusive Language in the Workplace, was published by the British Medical Association in 2016. And it explains that members of staff, whilst talking about pregnancy in general or referring to an individual whose gender is unknown, should simply default to gender-neutral language. Why? Well, because both trans and intersex people exist. In fact, intersex people make up around 2% of the total population. However, once a person's gender is known, use whichever term is most appropriate for the patient to make them feel welcome, as was the case with the breastfeeding story seen in the Sky News and LBC headline Brittany showed. Fact is, unlike the gender-neutral approach adopted by the previous example, Brighton and Sussex Maternity adopted a different approach, namely gender additive. And this was made clear in their Twitter post, which the LBC article linked that read as quote, "Our chosen approach to inclusive language is additive rather than neutral. Our webpage, leaflets, and general communications will refer to pregnant women and people, birthing women and people, or postnatal women and people, depending on the context. When talking to individuals, language will reflect their own individual identities and preferences." End quote. So to be clear, this is not, and I do quote Brittany here, a push to eradicate gendered language. They're guidelines published to ensure medical professionals can do their job properly. This is false outrage. That is a fake narrative designed to paint a marginalized group as being unreasonable. It's the same as the war on Christmas. Nobody who isn't a faux news viewer actually gives a shit. Because, spoiler, binary trans people like gendered language. Why? Well, because many of them find it validating when gendered correctly. So, this claim is simply garbage. When people like Brittany start inventing problems where there are none, that is clear evidence that they don't have a real argument to fall back on. Though of course, Brittany disagrees, having her own ideas as to why this is happening.
As much as some people might insist that language isn't that important and that forcing people to go against what they know to be true in the form of something that some people might consider to be not that important, like calling a man a woman, it actually is a massive deal. The border of language is the border of our minds. Language is how we express ourselves and how we interact with each other. And when we allow other people to control our language, we're allowing them to control us, to control what we say, and with enough work, to also control what we think. Not to be cliche, but in order to illustrate the importance of language in general, I'm going to make a reference to 1984 because the author George Orwell, he fully understood the importance of language and how by allowing our language to be controlled, it would pave the way for allowing our thoughts to be controlled. Orwell believed that totalitarianism and the corruption of language were connected. He focused especially on political language where you distorted events and concepts by calling them something else. One of Orwell's most important messages in 1984 is that language is of central importance to human thought because it structures and limits the ideas that individuals are capable of formulating and expressing. If control of language was centralized in a political agency, Orwell proposes, such an agency could possibly alter the very structure of language to make it impossible to even conceive of disobedient or rebellious thoughts, because there would be no words with which to think them.
Except the growing prevalence of the trans community and trans-inclusive feminism has only resulted in a marked increase in the number of words we now have to describe our experience of gender. On the other hand, Newspeak is predicated on the status quo limiting language, not through which words are deemed socially polite, but which words exist, period. The go-to example being that if you can erase all the words synonymous with or that can lead to the description of rebellion from social consciousness, it becomes so much harder for people to organize and rebel. Meanwhile, when you're told not to use a slur, you still know what that slur is. It's still part of social consciousness. It's still included in the dictionary. The same for misgendering. Telling a nurse not to call a patient assigned female at birth Miss does not suddenly erase the word Miss from social consciousness. It simply means you're treating the person with the respect they deserve, which, if you're a healthcare professional, is part of your job. If you can't treat queer folk, people of colour, or disabled people because you have some unresolved prejudice, you don't belong in healthcare. Period. So find another job. Fact is, there's a greater irony here in how new speakers citing the LGBT+ community actually experiences. Many of us knew we were different either in who we were attracted to or our gender or both from an early age. But because allo-cishet society, established historically through violence, denies us access to terminology that would allow us to describe who we are from an early age, that makes it difficult to explore ourselves and seek out community. So we see the only one seeking to limit language is the one demanding that trans and intersex people be erased from discussion. But it goes deeper than that. For you see, Whilst 1984 is a warning about the dangers of fascism, Brittany is married to a literal fucking Nazi. Martin Sellner is a Nazi from Austria and is the current leader of the Identitarian Movement of Austria, a far-right group that targets democracy. Martin himself has a long and sordid history, vandalizing synagogues with swastikas, leading memorial services for Nazi soldiers, and disrupting plays and political events. And whilst he claims to have left Nazi fascism behind in 2016, said behaviour continues to this day, showing this to be nothing more than a sorry attempt at a rebrand. In fact, Martin Sellner is such a Nazi piece of shit that he was denied entry into the UK in 2018. Yet perhaps even more telling is how he was denied entry into the US in 2019. Reminder that this was 3 years into Trump's administration, which constantly normalized the far right. This is the president that called for a fascist coup at the Capitol, and yet Martin was still too much of a Nazi piece of shit for even them to handle. Returning to the disruption of the play mentioned earlier, that took place after he claimed to have left Nazi fascism behind. And what that involved was Martin and 30 of his fellow browncoats from the Identitarian Movement of Austria turning up and spraying fake blood over the audience before assaulting both members of the audience and actors, including several actual refugees, all as a means of stopping the play. Why? Well, because the play in question charges the supplicants portrayed refugees in a sympathetic light, whilst Martin viewed them to be a threat to Western civilization. So I must ask, who is actually trying to control the way society speaks, and through that, perceives certain issues? And here we've arrived at another example of an Orwellian concept, doublethink. Fascism, the sort both Brittany and Martin aspire to, is mutually exclusive with free speech. And yet here she is, pretending otherwise. And this is something that is a staple for the far right, because Nazis and other bigots love to champion free speech, so long as that free speech is for them and no one else. As for the idea of what a person knows to be true in regards to trans women actually being men and vice versa, every major medical and scientific institution disagrees. This includes the aforementioned British Medical Association, which consists of over 159,000 doctors and 19,000 medical students. The scientific consensus is that trans people are the gender they say they are. So what Brittany proclaims as knowledge is personal incredulity. This is no different to creationists running around claiming evolution can't be true since they don't understand how it works. Her willful ignorance does not trump a century of scientific knowledge, and if she believes otherwise, she needs to get her shit peer-reviewed, replicated to form a consensus, and then come back to me. I mean, she clearly demonstrates that she has no understanding of the topic at all when she says crap like this.
As an example of just how confusing all of this can get, celebrity Ellen Page recently came out as transgender, taking on the name Elliot Page, but the fact that as a woman Page was a lesbian means that as a man Page would technically now be considered straight.
Elliot is not a trans man, they're non-binary. A fact Brittany would have known with the most cursory fact-checking, showing just how lazy she is when it comes to the topic. She doesn't even know the basics well enough to lie effectively, and yet presents herself as being qualified to speak authoritatively. Brittany is a rather bold embodiment of the western peak of Mount Dunning-Kruger. No knowledge, all confidence. And just one more thing before I do my final thoughts. Referencing 1984 may be cliché, but quoting someone else's blog verbatim, since you can't be bothered to come up with your own analysis, that's something else. Again, Brittany is a self-declared political activist, but all she seems capable of doing is grabbing a few misleading headlines, quote mining a few blog posts, before adding some raw assertion only to pretend like that's the case. Brittany is a joke, but she's also dangerous. Why? Well, it's rather clear that she's trying to present bigotry not simply as reasonable by relying on false outrage, but palatable. I sense that's the reason she pretends like everyone having differences is okay, while she targets trans people for their differences and is married to a literal fucking Nazi. She's trying to humanize fascism with the image of the well-spoken upper-class white woman, while simultaneously weaponizing critique of fascism against the marginalized. And that needs to be lit the fuck up so people can see Brittany for what she really is. Now, if you have any questions or criticism, do post them below. Just know that abuse won't make it through. If you appreciate what we do here on the channel, do know that you can support us via Patreon. We no longer monetize our videos, meaning that Patreon is the sole source of income for the channel, allowing us to keep it running. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following patrons: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Soren Katie, Keynes, Cthulhu, Garrett Van Vorst, Steve Corbin, Sosh Daniels, and Justin Allen. And for myself, Udita and Levi, take care now.